What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and welcome back to the last episode of my Yellowstone 2022 trip debrief. So in this video, we're not going to be looking at me, we're going to be looking at just some pictures and some processing work done in Lightroom. And I want to talk a little bit about what I'm looking for in images and what not. But before I start, I have a series of images here, and these are images of kind of where your expectations should be. So these 5 images are of wolves, 2 or 3 of one wolf that was the closer of the wolves that I saw, and 2 of wolf den with cubs. And all of these images were shot at 700 millimeters, so 500 millimeter f7.1 lens with a 1.4x teleconverter. They were also with the camera set to 1.6x crop mode. So that actually increases the focal length to almost 1200 millimeters. 1120 millimeters is the effective angle of view that you're looking at here. And of course, these are also being punched in some in the rendering of the video. And this is the kind of thing that, you should expect if you're to see with respect to what you're seeing. So these are the wolves in the wolf den. Not very great images, and you think, wow, man, that's horrible. Well, this is pulling out, and this is going to pull out to the kind of thing that you were actually seeing. And in fact, when it pulls out all the way, you could barely even tell that there's wolves there. You certainly couldn't see them without binoculars or a spotting scope. You certainly couldn't see them just looking without having somebody identifying where they were. You certainly couldn't see them on their own. And, you see all these great pictures of wildlife in Yellowstone, and, there's great options, and there's always the possibility that a wolf or a bear or something is going to be right by the road or cross the road, and you're going to get great shots. But this is the vast majority, or the reality, of what you can expect to see if you are out driving through the park on, kind of a regular type visit. Okay, so we're going to get into some processing here in Lightroom, and I'm going to talk about these images. This is a snowstorm that was coming up on the Yellowstone Lake Hotel, and you can see the Yellowstone Lake is actually still frozen over as a whole. And you look and you think, well, this isn't all that impressive. I mean, the sky is mostly gray, and, what's the big deal? There's actually a lot of texture that's hidden in that information. So messing with the contrast, messing with dehaze and clarity and Lightroom, as you see me doing here, and making use of, this is great. I mean, I love this in the Lightroom, 12 now or whatever, the automatic selection of the sky and sky or subjects. So you can pull the sky and you can really start messing with pulling out information. Now, obviously, this isn't what it looked like. It looked in person like just nothing. But, that's not the picture. The picture is the whole processed sky, the whole processed image. One thing I do want to point out that you should probably always do when you're doing one of these, I do a lot of masking with my sharpening to ensure that I minimize noise in the sky. I will also, when I'm going to do a lot of processing in terms of clarity or dehaze, I will also go back into that mask as I'm doing now, because I didn't think about this when I was doing it, and I will increase the noise reduction that's going on in the mask. So as you push an image's contrast, clarity, and dehaze levels, you really start to bring out noise that, obviously is not ideal to have. The other thing I wanted to talk about with this image is looking for images and the subject matter, looking for images and subjects and thinking about how you actually are going to, or what you're going to do with these images. So I'm always looking for images for wallpapers for my phone, tablet, laptop, and desktop. And my sort of requirement for those images is that the image be clean. Like, this is another perfect example of an image that's workable for that kind of thing. If you have icons and text on your icons with their text labels, I should say, on your desktop, and the image isn't clean, then you really have some issues. Now, this is one of those examples that I talk about using a polarizer for water. This is actually, there was water, a thin layer of water over this, which is why the sand is as washed out as it kind of is. You can also see the buffalo really just, they don't care about the signs that say stay on the trails. That dehaze can help a little bit to bring out some of the color and detail that's under that. But it's never going to be quite as good as actually having a polarizer in your images. This is also images from a thermal feature. I talked in the last video about I'm not a big fan of shooting thermal features, but there are some interesting sort of micro landscapes or micro details in the images or in the thermal areas if you go looking for them. So another thing you saw me just do here is trigger the auto tune or the auto tone function in Lightroom. I don't always use it. I don't always keep it, but sometimes I like to see what the auto comes up with. Likewise here, I've done a gradient mask on the top of the image because I felt that was a little more washed out than I wanted it to be, and then use dehaze to bring back some of the color saturation and detail information that's there. And generally, this is about the speed that I'm working when I'm processing images. I don't spend an awful lot of time on the image. Sometimes look to see if I like it in color. You'll notice I'm playing around with the different presets for the color, I don't know what you want to call it, color profile, whatever. Sometimes I like the rendering of Adobe's, sometimes I like the rendering of Canon's. I'm not someone who's trying to recover the actual, like, how it actually was. You know, I'm looking for an image that I find interesting and I'm hoping will make some kind of impact with people, you know, whether it's because it's an epic landscape or because it's, you know, dramatic wildlife doing something or dramatic weather or, you know, any of that kind of thing. Now here's another example of using some selective masking. I found that the white areas that I'm kind of filling in now were a little too bright and harsh for me. And I know there was detail in them because they aren't clipping. And I'm looking to see if I can bring out a little of that detail and a little of that, make them a little less harsh. But obviously I don't want to knock them down so that they're gray. I want them to still look natural, just not as highly exposed. So this is an example of an image that's could be interesting to make a big print out of. As you can see when I zoom in, there's a lot of interesting detail in the like plant material in the flowing water, but it would not make a good image necessarily for a background because it's just a little too busy in that respect. So this is another thing that I do quite often, or a lot of. I have this thing I don't like. I stitch panos, and I stitch HDR panos, and I really should do a video on my handheld pano technique because I think it might be useful for some people. I have a problem, as much as I talk about, you know, you don't need gobs and gobs of resolution. You don't need to shoot 600, 800, megapixels. You don't need a 60 megapixel camera. I have always had a problem with shooting a pano where I have or shooting a single image, I should say, where I know I'm going to go in and I'm going to crop the top third and the bottom third out. And you end up taking a single, let's just say 45 megapixel image, and you end up with like 12 or 13 megapixels worth of information out of it. Now, I also like to print these big. I'm talking 90 inches, a meter tall, something to that effect. 30 inches or a meter tall, roughly 90, 120 inches wide, like really big prints. Okay, maybe they're not that really big, but they're really big for me. And I like having the detail. And this is one place where I would argue that the whole sort of resolution and how you look at pictures problem or question. So as you, generally speaking with images, as you make the image larger, your person stands further away from the image and looks at it from a longer distance. The idea is that it's more comfortable for the eyes to have the image in a smaller angle of view that your eyes don't have to track over it as far. However, with really large panos, and this is at least for me at least, I find that I like to be a lot closer than I would expect, and I like the pano to be really immersive, so it fills the periphery of my vision. And when I'm shooting and composing the panos, I'm often thinking of, can I find little scenes somewhere where if I'm looking at that scene, I have the rest of that image filling up my periphery of vision and really just making it an immersive experience to stand there, look at the picture, and be like, well, this is what it was like when I was actually there. This is a little bit more of a traditional landscape type image. It's not necessarily a really super wide kind of thing, but I'm going to do this as a pano, or I would shoot this as a pano nonetheless. I have a tendency to shoot these kinds of things as panos. Of course, stitching it all together in Lightroom is, a little bit time consuming, so let's just kind of fast forward on that. Okay, so skipping ahead, pano processing is just wrapping up. It's finishing rendering, and we're going to be right off into editing the image. So there's a little bit of work that I want to do to this. Some of it is going to be just messing with the color, getting the tone looking right, having all of that kind of thing going on. But a lot of it is going to just be pulling out as much as I can from the sky. Of course, this is a big file, about 540 megs, so it takes a little while for that to get loaded up. And of course, first thing I'm going to do, like I said, I like hitting the auto button sometimes. It's not like I don't want to or don't know how to process the image, but sometimes that gets me where I want to be, as fast as I want to be there. Of course, little dehaze. I like dehaze in my landscapes. It brings out a lot of the color and gets rid of some of the haze literally in the distances in the backgrounds. I'm also going to play with color balance a little here. Not sure how I want to go with this. See what Lightroom comes up with. I like the slightly cooler color. This was shot in the late afternoon, but we weren't quite getting into the really warm sunset kind of light. So I like a little bit cooler color. I think it works for me in this image, maybe a little bit better than something that was a little warmer or something to that effect. But the real trick that I want to get into with this image is, specifically in processing it, is I want to pull out more detail in the sky, especially in that left sort of side where it's kind of white, that area. So I'm gonna use the lovely masking capabilities in Lightroom now. I'm going to create a mask that's auto-selecting the sky, and then now it's just playing with what I like in the settings. And you see I undo things a lot, so I will mess with a little clarity. Does that help get me kind of where I'm looking for? Maybe not. What about contrast or exposure? Does that help? Does it not help? Yes, no, sometimes it really, again, I see so many people talking with Lightroom about, like, here's this guide and here's how to process a landscape. And then they start trying to get into really details. How to process a landscape, how to process any of your images really should come down to what looks good for you. So, make some adjustments, find some things that you don't particularly like or you think are a little overdone or not enough detail or not enough interest there, and then mess with that as you see fit, messing with the sliders. And of course, if your image is reasonable sized, or even in this case unreasonably sized, and you have a reasonably modern computer, you're going to have some pretty decent luck with being able to work quickly. So I know this was a bit of a whirlwind tour of these images and kind of blowing through things kind of quickly. And I mean, this is kind of how I work with this stuff. A lot of it is just dragging, messing with sliders and looking at what I like. And really, that's what you should be doing. Like, you shouldn't be thinking so much about what some guide says or somebody on YouTube says you should do. You should be looking at the pictures, evaluating what you like, what you think is going to be a good image. So I'm going to wrap this up here. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. If you found this useful or informative, let me know by hitting that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you're not already. Also share this if you think it might help somebody you know. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.